Ukraine's $3.4 billion deep strike operation obliterates Russia's Karishi mega-refinery. In one of the most far-reaching deep strike operations of the war, observers watched as Ukraine launched a drone mission that would penetrate more than 1,020 kilometers into Russian territory and dismantle a refinery supplying over 6.2% of Russia's national fuel output. What started as a small cluster of low-cost UAVs evolved into a cascading industrial disaster that erased more than $3.4 billion in Russian infrastructure, overwhelmed radar networks, and exposed critical flaws in Russia's most fortified defenses. By sunrise, Karishi was no longer a refinery, it was a collapse visible from space. And to understand how it all unfolded, the story begins. Today at 1:47 a.m., the operation that would inflict more than $3.4 billion in assessed Russian industrial infrastructure losses began under the cover of darkness across northern Ukraine. What started as a quiet ripple of drone activity inside an abandoned orchard evolved into one of the most far-reaching Ukrainian deep strike missions of the war, an operation designed to break through more than 1,020 kilometers of Russian airspace and cripple a refinery responsible for over 6.2% of Russia's national fuel output. The planners understood that striking Karishi would not simply damage a facility, it would undercut a strategic backbone of Russia's logistics system. Fuel supply, military aviation reserves, and regional distribution hubs each depended on Karishi's continuous operation. And if the strike succeeded, Russia's refining sector would face one of its most significant single-day breakdowns in decades. By 1:52 a.m., the opening move began. 14 UJ-22 drones, each roughly the size and weight of a motorcycle, lifted from their concealed rails. Though outdated, its sensors fed a regional network Russia relied on to detect low-altitude threats. Ukraine selected it because disabling it would produce a temporary but decisive gap in coverage. The UJ-22S flew at 80 meters, slipping beneath the radar horizon. By the time Russian operators noticed the anomalies, the drones were already inside the perimeter. 3 hit the generator hut, triggering a fireball that severed half the antenna grid. The radar feed collapsed. Nearby S-300 crews, unaware of the larger operation unfolding, launched dozens of S-300 interceptors, each costing millions, to chase down the remaining drones, an early imbalance that foreshadowed the hours to come. With Neville offline, Ukraine had created the first opening. By 2 a.m., hundreds of kilometers away, the main sky corridor began to shift. Early warning radars across the region flickered in and out of calibration mode. Confusion spread through Russian tracking centers. And in that narrow window, Ukraine unleashed a coordinated wave across central Ukraine. Barns, depots, rest stops, and converted grain silos, simultaneously activating their rails. Within minutes, more than 30 FP-1 drones were airborne from the orchard alone. Across other launch sites, the count rose rapidly. By 2:18 a.m., nearly 350 drones of multiple classes were en route in a synchronized formation. Flight paths were pre-sequenced. Each group was assigned a specific cruising speed. FP-1S advanced at 210 km per h, UJ-22S at 155 km per h, and decoy Mugen-5S at 135 km per h. The unequal velocities ensured that every strike element, decoy, absorber, and attacker would reach its target inside a unified 20-minute window. At 2:23 a.m., a radar post near Bryansk detected over 40 low-signature tracks rising steadily. Operators initially dismissed them as atmospheric clutter. But when the signatures multiplied to 41, the intercept protocol was activated. MiG-31 fighters scrambled, their Zaslon M radars sweeping at full power. As planned, these radars locked onto the high-altitude Mugen-5 decoys. Every kilometer the fighters climbed was a kilometer. They weren't searching for the FP-1S flying only 50 meters above ground, masked by terrain curvature. By 4 a.m., the core strike package approached the Belarus-Russia frontier. The original formation of about 30 FP-1S had been reduced to 26, but its tactical shape remained intact. The air thickened with Russian defenses, multiple battalions of S-300S, electronic warfare clusters, and frequency-hopping radars built to withstand modern jamming. But Ukraine arrived with intelligence gathered months earlier. Ahead of them stood Russia's 9S-19 M2 radar, known informally as the cheese grater. Fast, agile, and capable of hopping more than 110 frequencies per second. Ukrainian analysts had discovered a flaw. Every 10 seconds, the radar paused for half a second to recalibrate. A tiny window, but enough for a coordinated dive. A single Mugen 5 sacrificed itself, climbing above 5,100 meters to trigger an S-300 launch. In the 2 seconds before impact, its transmitter captured the radar's recalibration rhythm and sent it across the network. The remaining 25 drones dove instantly. For half a second, the radar saw nothing. When it returned, the drones had disappeared beneath the horizon, hidden by the curvature of the Earth itself. Russia's most fortified belt had been breached. At 6:19 a.m., the Karishi refinery came into view. A sprawling industrial landscape of cracking towers, pressurized pipelines, and massive fuel reservoirs stretching for kilometers. For decades, Karishi symbolized regional industrial strength. But within the next minutes, it would transform into a cascading system failure that no emergency crew was prepared to contain. At 6:20 a.m., the first FP1 struck the CDU-100 primary distillation unit. The explosion produced an estimated 95 psi overpressure, shearing support frames dating back to the late Soviet era. Superheated crude at 375 degrees Celsius and 29 atmospheres erupted from the ruptured lines. When exposed to oxygen, it vaporized and generated a rolling fire front, moving at nearly 900 mAs. Operators had seconds to react, too few to activate bypass valves. Flames engulfed multiple wings. Holding over 82,000 barrels, the impact ignited vapor trapped beneath its floating roof. The 47-ton lid launched over 180 meters, crashing through an administrative hall. The shockwave destabilized the fractionator column already under pressure swings. Internal temperatures beyond 380 degrees Celsius, combined with the sudden structural shift, triggered a BLEVE, a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion that split the 40-meter column along 3 weld seams. The upper section blasted 850 meters away. Automatic suppression systems attempted to activate, but the first blast had severed the main water trunk. Pumps lost pressure. Valves jammed. The refinery was left defenseless against a growing industrial inferno. By 7 a.m., the facility entered a phase that exceeded any designed emergency protocol. Without water pressure, without functioning isolation valves, and with multiple systems collapsing simultaneously, Karishi's infrastructure began failing layer by layer. Flames rose into vertical towers, reaching 140 meters, hot enough to deform structural steel within minutes. The launched roof from Tank 47 ignited 6 neighboring tanks, each containing tens of thousands of barrels. Radiant heat exceeded 1,150 degrees Celsius, triggering sequential fuel-air detonations that rolled through the western yard. The catalytic cracking unit lasted only moments longer. Shockwaves from the BLEVE ruptured its primary riser. Catalyst slurry at 520 degrees Celsius spilled across the concrete aprons. When exposed to leaking hydrocarbons, a pressure front expanded at nearly 2,000 mpers, punching through heat exchangers and severing diesel and naphtha pipe racks. In the control tower, screens went dark. Distributed control nodes melted. Sensor data failed. Operators evacuated as the window glass softened under extreme heat. Satellite imagery captured a plume stretching 7 kilometers, drifting toward the Gulf of Finland. By 7:30 a.m., Karishi no longer functioned as a refinery. It had become a burning labyrinth of fractured pipelines. More than 47 kilometers of interconnected conduits conducted heat throughout the facility like arteries feeding the fire itself. Russia had lost 6.2% of its national refining capacity in a single morning. Inside Moscow, the shock was immediate. Over 1.8 million barrels of semi-processed product stored in connected tank farms became inaccessible. Pipelines feeding St. Petersburg suddenly lost pressure. Emergency rerouting procedures, unused since the early 1990s, were activated. Analysts projected 5-7 months just to restore partial operations. Full recovery could take a year or more under sanctions limiting replacement components. The deeper consequence, however, was doctrinal failure. Russia's integrated air defense system, built at tremendous cost to intercept bombers and hypersonic threats, had been outmaneuvered by machines built from plywood, hobby engines, and commercial GPS boards. The cost imbalance was impossible to ignore. A refinery worth billions, undone by drones costing less than a minute of interceptor jet flight time. As the plume stretched nearly 30 kilometers across the Baltic winds and the last flames dimmed into smoldering lines, Ukrainian planners assessed the operation as one of their most strategically disruptive deep strike missions to date. Russia, in turn, confronted an unavoidable reality. A system built to counter large threats faltered against small ones. Today, the refinery lies in ruins. The Russian economy absorbs the shock. And Ukraine, through low-cost asymmetric warfare, demonstrates a capability that rewrites traditional assumptions about industrial defense. The real question now is not what was destroyed, it's what follows. If drones light enough to be carried by one person can penetrate deep into fortified territory and dismantle a multi-billion-dollar refinery, what does that mean for every other critical facility within range? What does this imply for future conflicts, for national infrastructure, and for the widening gap between cost and firepower? And more importantly, how will future targeting adapt when the balance of warfare shifts again?